we cannot continue to just bring out new devices every 3 years and expect that there is going to be enough natural resources to build these devices. And that, of course, changes the entire industry. You clearly see the evolution of society when our kids go in and have decision-making positions in companies.
It's not about if, but it's more about when. Hi, my name is Neale and welcome to Sustainable IT in Conversation, where we talk about real-world sustainable IT delivery, and we do it with people whose opinions should matter, the people doing it and delivering it. The people navigating how the end user, the channel and the OEM and the reseller and everybody in between is navigating the challenge of sustainable IT delivery. Now, I don't put myself in that camp, and my guests are far better suited to claim that title than me, but for what it's worth, I'm the founder and CEO of Circular Computing, a company that is trying to bring an alternative option for enterprise customers to the default of just buying new when it comes to laptop computers. It's a sustainable option without asking them to compromise on quality or risk. And my guest today is Andreas Mayer, CEO of FlexIT Group. Andreas, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
And to begin, why don't you tell our audience about you and why your opinions and perspectives matter?
Thanks, Rod. I don't know whether my opinions matter, but I hope that I have some interesting things to contribute. I've spent my life in the IT industry, embarrassingly long time now. Starting at the vendor side, hardware vendor side has been my predominant career with IBM, Lenovo, and HP for many years, where I ran different kinds of businesses for them. And now for the past 2.5 years, I'm the CEO of FlexIT. FlexIT is a company that has multiple pillars. One very critical one is, of course, our circular IT business in terms of refurbishing and selling refurbished hardware. We also have a rent business, which is, again, an interesting contribution in terms of reusing equipment instead of buying new equipment. And we're also a European-wide demo pool provider for various vendors. So, quite broad portfolio that we have, and thus have a broad experience, I think, across Europe when it comes to circular IT.
Thank you. Andreas, what do you feel are the biggest anchor points? What's the biggest point for the argument for sustainable IT?
It's a great question. And I think there are quite a few. Of course, a big one is just when you look at what's happening in society. There is the focus that society is putting on sustainability today, which is driving a lot of behaviors. In private life, where you see a lot more people buying used equipment, when I look at my daughters, where secondhand clothing, secondhand devices are suddenly something that they prefer to buy compared to new things. But it's also something that you see in the corporate world, where the ESG reporting, ESG priorities become more important, to the point that actually company owners, board members are paid based on fulfilling certain ESG requirements. And that, of course, is then driving an entire ecosystem where circular IT, sustainable IT becomes more relevant. That is, of course, contributed then by government regulation, where you see in multiple countries efforts to drive less use of resources, and that drives regulation that helps the circular IT in its entirety. And I think last but not least, an anchor point that we see is that technology today has reached a level that allows the reuse of equipment after it has been put back into a state that makes it nice to use a lot more credible. So you can have a second, you can have a third life for equipment, because even an equipment that is 3, 4, 5 years old actually fulfills the requirement of many people that need a device.
Do you feel that the rewards for companies, for end users going in that direction are laid out clearly for end users? Do you feel the benefits of choosing a sustainable IT product from a social and an environmental perspective? Do you think they're laid out right for the end user?
There's a lot of communication around it. Has it gotten through to the broad community yet? I don't think so. I think you see there is a lot more, and it's literally something that is getting more every day. But there's still a lot of work to do for explaining to users, to explaining to procurement, to explaining to business owners why it is a very viable option to make circular IT part of the solution. And I'm saying very consciously, make it part of the solution, because as much as I would love people to buy 100% circular IT, I think the idea is to get started with it. Buy 20% of your equipment in circular IT, because when you look at your own organization, you will always find that there is sufficient amounts of people that have IT requirements that can be easily serviced by devices that have already had a first life. And combining the technological requirements and the fit to your organization with the fact that it is a financially very attractive solution is something that we still have to do a better job to make it well known across the industry. You see it getting reflected more and more, but not yet enough. But every time that I talk to people in the industry, and when I talk to buyers, and you talk to them about why it's not only financially attractive, which it obviously is, but also technologically interesting, then you get a big aha, and people are very much willing to look at this in more detail.
So what are those points? If I'm the CEO, CIO of a large enterprise corporate, what advice can you give me to incorporate a used product within my procurement strategy?
So it starts with going into your organization and profiling the usages, the usage profiles in your organization. And then you will quickly see, okay, I have these guys, they are using the full processing power, and actually by having the latest and greatest, they're going to be able to do their job faster. They need this new device. And then you have people, well, frankly, people like me who don't do any meaningful work. All I'm doing is looking at some emails. I don't need huge processing power. I'm using a 5-year-old device and it serves me perfectly, right? So, and then defining who needs what in my organization then allows you to very easily develop the right solution for that person. And you can look at, okay, for these 20% of the people, this type of device is fully sufficient. And hey, I can buy it at half the price of a new device. So not only am I doing something that helps me meet my ESG goals, reduce CO2 emission, but also I'm actually making things a lot more financially attractive for my company. So I'm achieving two things at the same time. If I then on top of it combine it with messaging internally that makes employees realize we are contributing to being a better citizen, to help the environment, then you actually increase the buy-in of employees to get a circular device, and people actually asking for a circular device because they're proud of doing their part, just like driving an electric car instead of a gasoline car, and so on.
So it's the advance towards persona-based refresh as opposed to a defined date. It's more a question of this persona needs this equipment, this persona needs this equipment, and it's the introduction of that becoming the norm, I guess.
Yeah, when I started in the IT industry, I had customers who had homogeneous requirements. They wanted 5,000 devices that looked exactly the same, and not only on a high level, but they needed to have the same memory manufacturer, the same SSD manufacturer. And when you look at OEMs, they mix and match, right? You're going to get a 128 gigabyte SSD, but it can be from different manufacturers. Back in the days, it had to be 100% homogeneous because otherwise their IT images might be having problems. Over the last 10 years, you had a lot of that bring your own device becoming very prominent in the IT infrastructure. And that also meant that as a CIO, people had to get used to actually managing different types of devices in their organization. And that allows you now to have these profiles and actually get devices that fit specific profiles instead of needing to have 100% the same device. So it allows you to go down that path of what we just discussed.
Who in the channel do you think are going to be the biggest beneficiaries of sustainable IT? And then who is also in danger of being one of the biggest casualties? Who do you think is going to be a positive, and who do you think has to tread carefully, or they might find that the market moves away from them?
Yeah, I think that's a bit like any time that there is a new technology. If you're a channel partner and you are seeing your role as being a trusted advisor to your client, and you incorporate solutions like circular IT in your discussion with the customer, you show the customer how it can benefit to him instead of driving a hard sale, then you are going to be a winner in this arrangement. If the customer feels like, okay, he is really helping me find the right solution instead of trying to push me down wherever the salesperson is earning the most money, then you're going to be the winner. But it means that as a channel partner, you need to become familiar with those solutions so that you can be credible towards your customer.
What is something that you believe in and stand by, but sometimes you struggle to get your peers in the industry to also follow the same path?
It's an interesting one because it starts with being familiar with what circular IT is, and getting that message across is still a hurdle. Because when you look at the channel today, the channel has to sell many, many different products, right? A typical account manager has to be able to sell a customer a cloud solution, has to be able to sell cyber security, has to be able to sell installation services. Then on top of it, hardware from a workstation to the PC to a notebook. And now you're coming in and you're trying to ask them to also sell a circular IT solution. And it's not easy for an account manager and for an organization to really cover all the bases. So that's, I think, the biggest hurdle when you're trying to get something that is new into the channel. New. It's refurbished, but it's a new experience for the channel team, and really getting that across and getting the headspace from the channel organizations. That I think is the biggest challenge.
In the same sense, how has the business changed from 10 years ago and 5 years ago? How do you believe the businesses have changed over that period?
Yeah, we see clearly that there are a lot more circular business models in the industry, and that it's something that is evolving. And we're in the process of moving from talking about it to doing it. Talking about it is something that has probably been happening now for the past 4 or 5 years. 10 years ago, hardly anybody was talking about sustainability. And when you were talking about refurbished devices, the only people looking for refurbished devices were those who looked for buying something cheaper than buying something new. Suddenly, you're talking with corporate resellers that are serving the top 100 clients in the world, who suddenly have an ESG strategy and are looking for support on how they can meet their objectives to be CO2 neutral by a certain date. And that, of course, changes the entire industry. The type of suppliers that a corporate reseller is looking for, or a top 100 corporate company in the world is looking for, is different. They're looking for mature channel partners. They're looking for people that are not cowboys. Like, that's how I always described this industry maybe 10, 15 years ago. It was cowboy land, very interesting, very dynamic, trade-based business. And now they're looking to people that actually can go in front of a board and have a discussion there and explain what are the benefits of circular IT. And this is really a dramatic change for the industry. And that journey, I think we're probably halfway there now, because the interest is there. The talks are starting with those corporate, and as you know very well, with governments in Europe that are now having those discussions. And they want to talk to a different kind of reseller, to a different kind of supplier than it was 10 years ago.
I agree. Me and you have discussed this point at length quite a lot. And I think we're both in the space of it's not about if, but it's more about when. It's when the market is going to make the big shift, not whether it is or isn't.
Yes, absolutely. It's frustrating to wait until the when. We both know that it is going to happen because, I mean, there are so many clear factors that force it, right? I mean, we know that resources are limited. We know that we cannot continue to just bring out new devices every 3 years and expect that there is going to be enough natural resources to build these devices. So we're going to have a business model that focuses more on reusing it. That's one given. The other thing is you clearly see the evolution of society when our kids go in and have decision-making positions in companies. The importance of sustainability is at a very different level than it is with people 10 years ago. And all of that is going to drive a much higher demand for these kind of devices in the future. Whether that's in 6 months, whether that's in 2 years, or whether that's in 4 years, we will see. But it is definitely going to happen.
Do you think there's an element of, this can be sort of put in the same camp as you pay more money for organic bread, you pay more money for, organic eggs, or anything think of that description? Do you think there's a challenge that the used industry has to get over, which is you're doing this in the left hand, which is the value that people place upon this product allows them to accept that you have to pay more money for it, but over in a organic, remanufactured, quality refurbished product over in this hand, that it's always got to be cheap? Do you think that's a barrier that the industry somehow has to redefine?
Unlike biological or organic products, when you look at circular IT products, they're usually less expensive than a new device. So you actually have a double benefit, right? Mm-hmm. So you actually get technology at a more affordable price than a new device. The challenge that we've often discussed is, of course, that within the circular IT, you have very different levels. And I think our aim is, of course, to drive a very good customer experience and thus bring out high quality circular IT devices. And that is something that drives, of course, additional cost into the process versus somebody who is just turning around a device, putting it in a new packaging, maybe cleaning it a little bit and sending it back out. And yes, getting customers to pay extra for that high quality and making sure the market isn't distorted by players that are just looking for the low price, and thus actually driving at times negative customer experiences on the back of it, that then again hurts the broader circular IT industry. I think that's one of the challenges that we're indeed facing, which is why we're communicating like today to clients and to interested parties about why it's a good idea and maybe what to look out for.
Do you think that everything is in place if all of a sudden, those big 100 customers, if they turned up and they said, okay, we agree, we want to go down this direction, do you actually think the channel is ready to serve those buyers at scale?
When the large corporates come to the channel and ask for it, the channel will very quickly be able to do it, because then it's a fulfillment where they acquire the equipment from the likes of you, from the likes of me, and we have it ready. So we can support them to support their clients very quickly. So from a pull perspective, yes. Is the channel ready to push it? Some are, many are not. Back to what I mentioned earlier, they have a very broad portfolio, and then sometimes it's a question of what's the personal interest? How much is the individual account manager invested into sustainability, whether they are pushing the idea towards their clients? Again, on a pull side, I think it'll work very easy. When a client asks for it, we can support the channel to be a good partner to their client. And again, talking about the social dynamic, there's going to be more and more account managers from Generation Z where sustainability is a key factor. And when they actually see solutions that they can put to their clients that is sustainable, they will push it. So also there, it's a question of when, not if.
And who do you think are the tech companies that have surprised you most with their pace of delivery? Which of the tech companies do you think are driving the sustainable IT message forward? And if you're prepared to say, who do you also think are the ones that are lagging behind?
Yeah, I have actually been impressed. We're working very closely, for example, with HP, and it's been very refreshing to see how much HP is investing in teams and resources in order to build programs that drive circular IT. It's of course complex, and requirements are different by country, but we've both started local programs in the Netherlands, in Belgium, and the Nordics through a program called HP Approved Selection, and we're also working with HP on a worldwide level in order to implement programs that drive sustainability. And it's really the most impressive thing when I look at HP is at how senior a level they are really focusing on this topic. At a large event, I had the opportunity to speak with their CEO, Enrique Lores, about sustainability, right? The fact that he takes the time with a company that 10 years ago, they probably wouldn't have touched because it was one of those in that cowboy world. And he is making time and spending half an hour at a worldwide event where partners from across the world are trying to get airtime with him. I think that was a very good reflection of how much focus they're putting on it. Similarly, we're working with Lenovo, and also there I see that they're having a lot of focus building programs in terms of driving circular solutions to the market. I think they're all still trying to figure it out, which solution is going to work best in the market, right? And they're trying multiple things. but they are trying, right? Just like many other of us are trying different things to identify what works with what kind of client. And as usual, requirements by clients are going to be different by segment, by market, by country. And then, being flexible in terms of those solutions.
And how much does that help you as a company that's approaching the market? How much does it help you when that momentum and that velocity and that push comes from the OEM? How much is that a benefit? How much does that help?
I think it's definitely a benefit, because one of the big hurdles when you talk about circular IT is trust. So when you are the old saying, when you as a CIO, you never got fired for buying IBM. As a CIO, you're not going to get fired for buying new equipment. Now I'm going to try and I'm going to put refurb equipment in front of or remanufactured equipment in front of my employees. If something goes wrong, am I exposed, right? So you need to give your customers trust that the solution that you have is something that works and that they're not going to have a problem with. And of course, when they see that companies like HP, like Lenovo, put their name behind it, that gives a lot of additional trust to a client to go down that path, versus just saying, okay, I trust this vendor or this refurb company to be a great supplier for my IT infrastructure. So that trust part, I think, is important, and thus I'm very happy that the OEM vendors are putting that focus in there, because it's going to help our entire industry.
I actually think that's probably one of the biggest points. The biggest points, exactly as you just mentioned, nobody got fired for buying IBM, which is all about risk. And it's how you lower that degree of risk, because at the end of the day, the person making the decision is the CIO of a big enterprise company. And at the end of the day, it's about risk. And it's how do you alleviate that risk, because he will not risk his job by saying, Dave said they're really good. It doesn't hold no weight. And he's just going to be fired on the basis that is an intolerable risk.
Yeah, exactly.
How do you think that as we progress, what do you think will be the impact of AI-enabled hardware on the refresh rates, and also the reuse of that non-AI-enabled hardware coming out?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's something where I've been asked, well, don't you see that as a risk to your industry? And I actually think it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for the simple reason that AI PCs are going to drive a refresh, which means that additional use devices are coming into the ecosystem in order to be remanufactured or refurbished. And as you know, one of the big challenges that we have in this industry is the availability of used equipment, so that we can do our magic on it and make it ready for the next user. And actually, through the AI introduction, we will see more devices coming back into the refurb cycle. And then when you listen to Yang Qing, the CEO of Lenovo, or Enrique, CEO of HP, they clearly say, yes, we're expecting a big demand on AI PCs, but it's also that they say in a few years, there's maybe a 50% of the devices that will be AI devices. So they clearly acknowledge not everybody needs an AI device. And it's back to what I mentioned earlier, make refurbished, make remanufactured part of the solution. It's not about only selling those devices, making it part of the solution. So if 50% of your employees don't need an AI device, we've got a solution with the second life devices that we're bringing to the market that fully meet the requirements that the employee has in order to fulfill their tasks.
FlexIT it's very much in the used and the remarketing space, and it's one of the most successful and long-standing companies in the space in Europe. Just so that the audience that may not be familiar, where are the big challenges in the ability to just take a product out, let's call it first use, and putting it back in, let's call it reuse? What are the biggest challenges that a company like FlexIT just has to deal with when they just want to pull a product out and put it back in? What are your biggest challenges?
Well, I think the biggest challenge remains still availability of kit, and it's something we see this evolution within corporates in terms of you look at a device that's now 3 years old, 4 years old, and for most of the IT department, that's just a problem that they have to get rid of. And actually educating those clients that, companies like FlexIT, we have a solution for you to make sure we take that worry away. We take your old equipment, we data wipe it in a certified way so that there's no risk of your data being anywhere. We ensure that any equipment that cannot be reused is being recycled in a responsible manner. And we are then reusing the equipment as much as possible, and we're actually paying you money for that. So it's no longer just a problem, but it's actually something where you get something for. And this part of the education process is another thing that is important in our industry, increasing the amount of available kit so that we can sell it on to customers. Today, still too much equipment is actually coming from the US into Europe because there's not sufficient supply available in Europe. The other challenge that we have is that for whatever reason, Europe has decided to be many different countries, and they couldn't agree on a single keyboard layout. And so when I buy equipment in the UK and I want to sell it in France, and I have a customer in France, I need to manage the keyboard layout for that. So that's one big hurdle that we have, and that requires some rework. But I think, once we have equipment, we have a solid process in order to make the equipment usable again and be able to roll it out to clients.
So when we move on to that next stage, obviously, we have an opinion at Circular Computing that, third-party certified remanufacturing is not the same as refurbishing. And as you said earlier, this is very much about education. And I very much, I'm of the opinion that, a company cannot be a refurbisher on Friday and then call itself a remanufacturer on Monday. And, as me and you have agreed, let me be clear, that's not a question around product and market fit. Refurbished is the biggest segment, within demand today. But do you think the used IT industry desperately needs some standards or guidance or clarity to allow what is basically the end customer to choose clearly? Is there, having both been in this market for, more years than I care to remember, is there a danger of the market not clearing up its own house and sort of losing the opportunity that it's being presented with?
Yes, so absolutely. I think standards is one of the critical things that we need in this industry. Actually, FlexIT is part of Eurofast, the European Refurbisher Association, and there's a lot of work being done working with the European Union in terms of driving certain topics. One of the things being like the Repairability Act that was recently passed, right, which is very important for our industry in order to allow proper remanufacturing or repairability. But it starts with what I mentioned earlier. What is the big hurdle for driving refurbished? It's trust. And trust can be achieved if you have common standards. If today I buy an A-grade refurbished product, and I know if I buy A grade from Rod, it's the same as when I buy it from Andreas, and when I buy it from Dave, and when I buy it from Steve. That gives me confidence, and it also gives me the ability to actually make people compete with each other. If everybody has their own definition of what's an A grade, and one allows that there are these long scratches in it, and I still call it an A grade, and for somebody else, A grade means it looks practically like new. That's the big challenge that we're facing with not having those standards. And that's probably, I think that's probably the biggest single hurdle next to the supply or the availability that I mentioned, is that comparability, that standard, so that every time that you get a new supplier, you don't have to first check, well, what does he mean with a grade A, and can I trust it? That trust question, coming back to that.
Yeah, I think it's risk and it's trust. I've mentioned this before. I always use the analogy of McDonald's, because McDonald's didn't bring anything new to the market. All they did was standardize the variable industry. And I just think that the used industry needs to realize that it needs to standardize something for the benefit of the customer. Doing something for the benefit of the customer benefits us all commercially. I think it's just one of those things that we get a little bit around the wrong way. We get, the language of competition doesn't help the customer. And I think you need to go to the customer and work backwards as to how they buy new product. This is about giving them the same options as how they buy new product, because then they will understand how the mechanisms work. The used industry is incredible at selling variable and risk. It is brilliant at it. It's done it for tens of years. But the brand new market doesn't sell variable and risk. It sells solutions. It doesn't sell anything else. And it's how the market is going to get its head around assimilating in what happens there when we're all so used to just being in pure competition.
Couldn't agree more.
If we now have our vision goggles on, where do you think the market's going to be in 10 years?
Well, I just referred briefly to the Repairability Act from the European Commission or European Union. And I think that's one of the trends that we're seeing. For, again, looking over the last 10 years, and when I was in the hardware industry, every year it was, we've got the new thinnest and lightest device. And it was 1 millimeter thinner than before. And of course, that had consequences. In order to achieve thinner and lighter, the vendors more and more soldered on equipment onto the motherboard, which makes repairing it, which makes exchanging it, which makes upgrading it more challenging. Part of it was, of course, to achieve the lighter and cheaper. Part of it was also that if you have it soldered on, it's faster. So there's a little bit of a challenge that's coming with that Repairability Act for the vendors. But I think we will see a trend back to devices that are easier to repair, easier to upgrade, and thus, by default, easier to refurbish and to remanufacture.
Do you think that the product's becoming more able to be upgraded? Do you think that's going to be a benefit or a negative to people like us?
No, I think it's definitely going to be a benefit because, I mean, a few years ago, a 128 gigabyte SSD was enough. Today, most customers will want a 256 gigabyte SSD. So if you are not able, for whatever reason, if the SSD was not able to be upgraded, you would struggle as a refurbishing industry to do that. And as more elements of the device are again able to be upgraded, I think that's going to help us as an industry. So the repairability is going to make it less costly for us, right? If it's easier to get into the insides of a device, you're not going to spend an hour refurbishing a device, but you can do it in a relatively short period, which makes the cost go down and makes your offering more attractive. So also in that sense, it's going to help us.
How do you see FlexIT having to, you know, as I said earlier, being one of the constants in this industry? How do you see FlexIT changing the direction or building upon the direction that they've started? Where do you see the next 5 years for FlexIT? Which direction does that look at?
As FlexIT, we have multiple legs to stand on, and I think the strength of the individual legs is changing over time. We're coming out of a history that was traditional refurbishing, and we're moving into one where we are more and more creating solutions for corporates, for ESG savvy organizations. And moving along that curve and building up those future solutions is really the journey that we've been on now for a few years. Through the relationships that we have with the hardware vendors, jointly building solutions that create trust for customers. And so let's say the traditional leg is going to get a little bit weaker, and the other leg in terms of the future solutions is going to get stronger. So putting more weight, putting more focus on that, but it's going to be a natural evolution, and you're going to have to do both, because it's not like you're from 0 to 100 in one go on the new solutions. You kind of still have to do both until the weight of the new market is big enough.
Andreas, thank you for joining me. I'm Neale, and this has been Sustainable IT in Conversation. Thank you to Andreas, and thank you to anybody who's listening out there. If you've enjoyed this and found the content of value, it would be helpful if you hit the like button on the way out. It helps us to know we're doing the right thing or the wrong, and what subjects or guests were more valuable than others. Please join us next time when we talk more about the real world of sustainable IT delivery. Goodbye.